Tonight, the migration challenge facing whoever wins the general election. Sky News witnesses dozens of police powerless to stop the people smugglers on France's beaches. And we've got exclusive new polling on whether voters think it can be dealt with. Has Labour really got a plan to tackle the issue? I'll be joined live in the studio by the party's chair, Anneliese Dodds. Plus, a new poll out tonight says Labour's on track to win a large majority, but 120 seats are too close to call. Is there any hope for Sunak? Well, he is insisting it's great that Boris Johnson's supporting the Conservatives at the election, but how much is he really? We'll be taking a look. All that and more with Jim Murphy and Nimco Ali, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, today we are talking about immigration. We've got a special day of coverage on this critical election issue and some really powerful eyewitness reporting from our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, who watched as hundreds of people gathered on the shoreline in France and clambered onto dinghies, some with young babies. We'll play you his report later on the programme. And it really is the perfect illustration of the challenge facing whoever wins the next election. But there's another thing that illustrates the scale of that challenge as well. Sky News polling carried out by YouGov reveals a deep distrust in all parties. 52% of people said they think Labour aren't telling the truth about what they think of immigration. 49% think the same of the Conservatives. And they don't think that either party will sort it out either. People told us that they think immigration would increase under both the Labour government and a Conservative government, even though their official plans are to reduce it. So people just don't believe that politicians will make good on their promises. And that deep-seated distrust, that cynicism really, is the challenge facing whoever wins the next election. Well, let's hear more, shall we now, about how people are feeling about migration as we head into the general election. Here's Sky's online campaign correspondent, Tom Cheshire.
The parties have been talking about immigration, but what does the public think? Well, an exclusive poll for Sky News has found that across the country, 43% of people asked thought that immigration has a negative impact on British society. That's compared to 35% here who say it has a positive impact. So clear difference there. And there are also clear differences between age groups. 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds thinks that immigration has a positive effect. But the older you get, the lower this number comes down. When you get to 65 and over, only 20% of those people thought immigration is good for society. And the results vary according to location. Actually, it's only in London and in Scotland that people were more likely to say that immigration has a positive impact. So the lighter the colour here, the less supportive people are of immigration. You see that band here, Northern Ireland not included in this survey. But the poll also revealed deep political distrust among the public. 52% of people said they think Labour aren't telling the truth about what they really think about immigration. Not much better for the Conservatives, only 49% here, so not a big difference, saying the same thing about them. The Lib Dems doing slightly better, maybe they spelled it out better. But every region, every demographic distrusted the main two parties here on this point. The exception here, Reform UK, the only party people think are telling the truth about their views on immigration. 60%, big number, agreed the party was saying what it genuinely thought. That doesn't mean they necessarily agree with the public, but they do think they're saying what they think. And the people don't really trust the main two parties to follow through on their promises. People thought that immigration would increase under both a Labour, that's what they're talking about here, and under the Conservative government, whatever it is, despite believing that the policies of the parties is to reduce it. And finally, respondents also thought that cutting immigration would have a negative impact on the NHS, on hospitality and on social care, but a positive impact here on housing and the housing crisis. So how do we take all that together? Well, the public understands that cutting immigration would hurt those very important sectors. So does it want politicians to be honest about that and cut immigration anyway? Or does it want to do the same things as the parties are doing, saying that immigration is too high, but to avoid damaging those sectors, keep it high while still complaining?
Well, today's crossings meant the party leaders were asked about the issue on the campaign trail. First, here's Rishi Sunak.
desperately sad to see young children being put in these very dangerous situations making these crossings. It just illustrates why we have to stop the boat, something I'm determined to do and have a clear plan to do so. If re-elected as Prime Minister, the flights will go to Rwanda. We will build that deterrent, removing the incentive for people to come here in the first place. That is the only way to solve this problem.
And the question was also put to the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, when he was out and about on the campaign trail a little earlier.
This is a very important issue, and it's a real test for government and would-be government, because we have to stop this vile trade of the gangs that are putting vulnerable people into boats to cross that channel and breaching our border security. The only way to stop this is to smash those gangs, and that's why we will set up our Border Security Command. This will be a new command with new powers, working with others to smash these gangs.
Well, the Shadow Equality Secretary, Anneliese Dodds, joins us. Good to have you here in the studio. Thanks for coming in. Let's talk migration, shall we? Because it's clearly a big election issue. We've seen, of course, record levels of net migration in recent years. Your party doesn't have a specific target on migration. Why not?
Because what we need is a clear plan. We've seen targets actually under the Conservatives. They've not delivered the change that's necessary. We need to have a clear plan, both in relation to the small boats. Keir Starmer obviously is right. We cannot continue with this situation where criminal gangs are operating with impunity. Labour set out that plan to stop those criminal gangs, to stop that vile trade. But we also need to have a clear plan on, of course, migration for work, where we've seen such a huge rise under the Conservatives, again with no plan, but Labour has a plan to ensure that we can deal with that too.
It's interesting you say you don't think you need targets because the Conservatives have targets and they didn't work. So is that what you're essentially saying? You don't want to put a number on it because you don't think you'll be able to meet it?
The Conservatives' approach very obviously has not worked, but both
just,
in terms
my
of...
My point is, is that really a great reason to not have a target? Because, oh, yeah, we might not meet it.
We want to ensure that we see net migration coming down. The reason why it's been going up over recent years is because of that lack of a plan, and particularly because of the issue of increased numbers of people coming in for work. Now, if you look at health and social care visas, for example, you've seen an increase in them of about 150%. Why has that happened? It's happened because the government has not had a workforce strategy for health and social care. It hasn't been training up the domestic workforce. You've seen in health and social care and in other areas unscrupulous employers who's been undercutting the workforce, the domestic workforce, by hiring people from overseas on lower wages and with worse terms and conditions. Labour's not just going to sit back on this. We're going to take action because that's what the people of our country deserve.
You say you've got a plan, you say you're going to take action. I have to say I was really struck by the polling today, right? The Sky News YouGov polling. And I should say this is not just directed at Labour, it's the Conservatives as well. But it just shows that people just don't believe you. They just don't believe you. They don't believe, firstly, that you're telling the truth about what you really think about immigration. And they also don't believe that you're going to get immigration down if you win the election either. And you can see why, right?
Well, I can see why people are cynical about the power of politics, because over the last few years, they've had so many promises that have been made by the government of the day. They've seen so many sound bites. I think it's a challenge for all politicians. That's why Labour's determined to turn our country around, to be really upfront with people about where there are challenges, about the fact that, for example, we will always see where the money is coming from. Obviously, something, again, the Conservatives are not doing with their manifesto, but which Labour would do. And we're determined to change that.
We've spoken a lot about the Conservatives. Let's talk about Labour. You're here to talk about your plan to revive British pubs. So are you going to extend the beer duty-frees then? That might help a bit.
Well, really, what seems to make the biggest difference for pubs is whether they're able to stay as pubs. That's what I've heard from publicans up and down the country, that they're finding it really difficult to ensure that if the property developers, for example, start circling around a particular pub, that they're able to actually maintain it as a pub. In theory, currently, there are powers for communities to be able to make those pubs into community assets, but it's far too difficult for communities to be able to do that. That's what Labour's talking about today. Let's make sure that communities are unleashed so that they can actually deliver those pubs that are needed, pubs that should be hubs for communities.
Are you a pub fan yourself? Are you a kind of pub goer? What's your...
I do like going to the pub. I think, like
tipple?
many people, well, I like real ale, you see.
And it's never a pub fan, fair enough.
Yes, it's never better than actually inside a pub, I've got to say, especially when you can have the fresh beer. And that's been a great thing that we've seen in our country, has been the growth of smaller brewers as well. Very exciting. So really, we should be doing all we can to support them. But also the pub is the hub, as the community centre. That's what Labour would do.
If Labour do win, as the poll suggests they will, Rachel Reeves today suggested that, you'd have to hit the ground running. So what does that mean? Does that mean a fiscal event before the summer, perhaps?
Well, that means having a clear plan about how we're going to deliver that change. Of course.
Come on. Let's engage with the question. What does that mean? A fiscal event before the summer?
Well, I'm going to have to say something before I answer that question, which is that barely any votes are being cast. I mean, postal votes are only just starting to land now, so still lots of people who don't know. We're getting up and down the country to have that conversation with them. If we are given that chance to serve, the very first thing that we will do for our economy is that first economic step that Keir and Rachel set out before the general election was even called. That's around making sure we have the fiscal lock in place that Labour said is so critical for ensuring stability, that our fiscal rules would also be put in place as well, because economic stability is fundamental for us turning our country around and delivering the measures within our manifesto. So that would be the first thing we do.
No hint on when that fiscal event might be?
Well, I'm sure Rachel will be thinking this through very carefully, but that first step is going to be about re-establishing economic stability, so important after the instability that we've seen over recent years.
OK, Anneliese Dodds, thank you very much indeed. Anneliese Dodds there of the Labour Party. Now, on a special day of coverage of migration here on Sky News, our correspondent Adam Parsons has been on a beach in northern France watching as hundreds of people gathered on the shoreline and clambered onto dinghies, some with children and very young babies. They're hoping to take advantage of the good weather and make their way to the UK. And it all happened under the gaze of French border police. Here's his report.
It's 4 a.m. and the people smugglers are out on the beaches of northern France. As we watch, a dinghy draws up and dozens of people climb aboard. It's fast and efficient. The boat leaves and the smugglers wave off their clients, now heading towards the UK, and then they run off. The sea is calm, and today business is booming. Approaching the shore, a dinghy with 5 smugglers on board. In essence, it's a taxi boat coming to collect. A police boat makes waves to try to block the dinghy's route, but it gets past, and the smugglers beckon the crowds of hopeful migrants. There's a surge, a rush to get to the boat. Children and babies are carried. Life jackets thrown on. A woman drifts away. She's struggling to swim. She will eventually be pulled aboard the boat by the smugglers. And watching from the beach, a long line of police who monitor, but under French law, can't intervene. It's hard to think of a more brazen example of people smuggling across the channel. Look over there are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by a police boat out in the sea and by dozens of French police officers on the beach. The final people drag themselves up onto the boat. Back on the beach, there are plenty who didn't make it. Rabaz is travelling with his wife and 2 small children. They've come from Iraq, intent on getting to Britain. How many times have you tried to cross
4
to Britain?
times.
4 times.
Yes, and I am still trying.
And you will try again?
Yeah, of course.
And
because I don't have any solution. I know very dangerous for me, for my children. I know this one. But when I don't have any solution, I will try.
it's a belief that fuels channel migration, that getting to Britain will make your life better. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Calais.
That's extraordinary footage filmed there. Well, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former government advisor, Nimco Ali, and the former Scottish Secretary, Jim Murphy. Great to have you both on. Look, we know it happens. We read the reports, we look at the numbers, but when you see people like that crowding onto the dinghies, people in the water, it's really something, isn't it?
It's incredibly depressing, and I say that as somebody that came to this country as a refugee. I was lucky enough at the time that we could get flights out of Djibouti, which is in East Africa, and there was a lot of humanity and more support within that kind of context. But I think looking at that, I think we lose the concept of looking at migration. That's not the real issue. This is about human trafficking. I think we need to look at the global issue about modern-day slavery, because a lot of these people are actually being forced to pay, or when they get here, they are being forced to pay back that kind of service due that they got into. So maybe I think rather than just looking at numbers, we need to actually look at like the real legalities and the whole organised crime behind it, because that is the biggest issue that is, I think, behind this.
I agree with that. And watching those images, they are stark, but less stark than the images we seem to have seen out of Greece over the last few days, where authorities, unlike in France, where the authorities have ignored the law breaking, in Greece they appeared to have taken them back out on the boats. The services have taken them back out in the boats and thrown the people overboard. Now, of course, there'll be an inquiry into that. But in the UK, and the relationship between the UK and France on migration seems to be broken.
Yeah.
Things have to, and I can't help but say as an aside, we were promised Brexit would stop all of this, and it hasn't. So we have to do something different. And look, all the parties will struggle with this. Of course they will, because people want to come to this country. They want to work in this country. It's, for all the faults in our country, it's still a very appealing place to be. And so probably a change of government gives a fresh chance of a new look at this. Particularly, the one thing I think that Labour's cottoned on to that I think may work is dealing with the gangs in the same way that you would deal with terrorists, without any empathy, without any excuses, and with the full force of the law. I can only hope that that would work.
Nimco, what do you make of the party's positions on tackling this issue? Because look, everyone wants the small boat crossings to stop, right?
Yeah.
You know, that is clear. Every party wants that. But how do you think the parties are going about it? Is it realistic?
It's not realistic, and I think the reality is that in that kind of concept is that we keep talking about numbers and not people. And having worked at the Home Office, I think this is like an organized crime situation where this department is like targeted consistently to kind of reduce numbers. But I think that there has to be a cross-government kind of tackling. This is a global issue. A lot of these people, as Jim said, are coming to the UK in order to work, but they're not really leaving their countries because they want to, because they're being forced out to. So we've got issues in Sudan, we've got issues in Ethiopia, we've got issues in the Congo, and we're ignoring all those other kind of issues and consistently talking about migration and numbers. But those numbers are going to come from places where we actually haven't had foreign policies on. So I think it's not just the Home Office. I think the Foreign Office really needs to step up on this kind of issue.
Jim, I'm interested in what you think about the Labour position, right? Because you say that you are hopeful that addressing it like terrorism will make a difference. But it's notoriously difficult to catch the traffickers, right? Every country is trying. No one has really got it right. And then, if they're talking about, agreements with France, you just look at what's happened in Adam's report, where France is, ignoring what's happening.
Of course.
Is it really anything concrete there that's going to make a difference?
Look, ultimately, Nimco's right. In an ideal world, you would deal with this problem at source, which is that remove the push factors that people are leaving their own country for. However, it's an unpopular thing to say, but I'm going to say it, which is that genuinely migration is good for this country. Managed migration and controlled immigration is good for this country. Nimco's family came to this country, my family came from Ireland to this country. It's a net benefit. They're usually younger, usually healthier, usually determined to work, but they shouldn't be allowed to come illegally. We need legal processes, and I think that's the type of thing that Labour will have to get up on top of if they win.
That's interesting.
And can I say one thing about the traffickers? I think we know where the traffickers are. Within the kind of the African stream is Libya. Libya is the place where all these kind of asylum seekers are coming together. They are paying smugglers. So the reality is that there are things that we can do on the international level, but we're so focused on these numbers in order to be able to appease people who just don't necessarily understand the whole concept of what immigration really looks like.
Really interesting debate. actually. Thanks both very much indeed. Big issues there about illegal migration, legal migration, and of course big challenges for the parties at the election too. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, Boris was, I should say, on the beach, but should he be on the doorstep? Could he make a difference? We'll be chatting about that. And after the break, as the channel crossings continue and the main parties say they want net migration to go down, our data and economics editor Ed Conway has been taking a deeper look. Stay with us.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, welcome back. Well, let's return to migration now, one of the key issues during this election campaign. Controlling migration is a real challenge facing governments across Western Europe, and stopping the boats was, of course, one of the 5 pledges that Rishi Sunak said voters should judge him on. Well, net migration, that's legal migration, is at a record high, and the boats continue to come. Sky's economics editor Ed Conway has been analysing migration trends post-Brexit.
Migration is one of the biggest issues in society right now, but also in the election. But what do the numbers actually tell you? Let's have a look at them. It's striking, isn't it? So much of the talk at the moment is about small boats arrivals. And actually, you can see, yes, the numbers are rising. They're bumpy, depending on the season, but 30,000 in the past 12 months, the highest they've been for quite some time. But how does that compare with the other bits of migration that we know about? So that's small boats. Now bring on other asylum seekers, that's considerably higher. Now bring on other legal reasons for migration, so work, study, and other reasons. Legal migration utterly dwarfs the illegal small boat side of things. And then if you add on other reasons, more recently, like Ukraine, people coming in from Ukraine and from Hong Kong, that's considerable as well. But really, it's study and it's work, and people who are dependents coming in for those reasons that are by far and away dominating this story. It's very different from the overall narrative that we tend to hear about. But one thing that certainly is clear is when you look at the overall picture, this is net migration as a percentage of the population going all the way back to 1855. This is unprecedented, what we're going through right now. Look at this line. I'm going to bring on the last year. We've never seen that line as high as it's been recently, and this is going back a long way, so people are right to be concerned about this because it is unprecedented. And that is perhaps why you've got a lot of politicians saying they want to do something about it. Of course, Rishi Sunak, he said that we have a clear plan to stop the boats and put a legal cap on numbers. That raises, of course, the issue of whether these caps can actually work. Most famously, there was a cap put in place by David Cameron, net migration in the tens of thousands. What actually happened? Look at the bars. That's net migration, of course, immigration minus emigration. It never went below that line. Obviously, then you had the pandemic, then the post-Brexit rules came into force, and look at what happened next. That is why we got to those kind of extraordinarily high numbers recently. But speaking of Brexit, there's someone else who certainly has a view on this. That's Nigel Farage, Reform leader, saying net migration should be zero, OK? But here's the thing, OK? So in the manifesto, the Reform manifesto, it says strict limits on immigration. Doesn't say net zero migration. Essential skills, mainly around healthcare, must be the only exception, OK? So healthcare, that raises a question, OK? If you're just letting skilled workers, healthcare workers in, what does that do to the numbers? Well, let's bring in these numbers, again, on immigration by type of work, OK? So type of work here, temporary, other, and skilled as well. There's other skilled. But look at the increase we've had recently in health and care. Basically, it's because of this that the NHS has kept going, because of an enormous increase. In fact, over 100,000 in the past year alone. That, seemingly, over 100,000 migration, will be consistent with Reform's position.
Well, this evening, Yalda Hakim will be live in Calais with a special programme focusing on the issue of migration from a global perspective. We'll bring you a series of reports, including from Italy, Mexico, and also here in the UK. That's tonight at 9 o'clock on Sky News. Well, let's return to UK politics now, because the Conservative Philip Dunne is speaking for the party today. He joins us now. Thank you for being with us. We're talking about migration here on Sky News. We've just seen a report from Adam Parsons where he's witnessed today migrants pouring onto dinghies in France and making that trip over to the UK. I mean, look, the Rwanda deterrent, it hasn't worked, has it?
Well, I think those images were very shocking, not least seeing small children being carried onto their boats by men and women, presumably their parents, hopefully their parents. It's quite clear that this has got to stop. It was equally shocking seeing French gendarmerie just standing on the coastline, not seeking to stop them. And I think the agreement that we had with the French worked very well in stopping the crossings over on lorries and heavy goods vehicles that happened up until about 2018. That has moved now through these organised criminal gangs into boat crossings, and this has to stop. I heard Alexander Downer, the former Australian High Commissioner, talking recently about how the Australians stopped this problem, and he was saying that the only effective way is a deterrent which requires asylum seekers to be processed offshore, which stops people from making those journeys. That's what happened in Australia. He was saying that whoever's in power in the UK will have to do something similar. We've got a plan. Rishi Sunak's plan utilises Rwanda. Many other countries in Europe are now looking at similar methodologies to try to provide an active deterrent. The Labour Party have voted 139 times against the Rwanda scheme.
You mentioned the French and the fact that there was a good relationship with the French where they helped the UK stop people crossing on lorries, and that seems to have broken down. So do you take responsibility for that, the Conservative government, then, the deterioration, the breakdown in goodwill with the French?
No, I don't think there's been a breakdown in goodwill. I think there's been a challenge of implementation. I mean, there is an agreement with France. The French have put more resources into it. And I'm not a migration Home Office expert, so I don't know the details of that agreement and why it doesn't appear...
It doesn't seem to be working, does it? They're just watching people get on boats.
No, those images certainly look like it's not working. And I think we need to be talking to the French about what they can actually do to stop this. It may be that they need to introduce more domestic legislation in France. They're facing similar problems, of course, on the Mediterranean coast with massive increases in illegal immigration there. So they have a similar problem. And we, as is the case across Mediterranean countries, we need to be working together to try to solve these problems.
OK, we'll be talking more at 9 o'clock with Yada Hakim about the kind of international efforts to tackle this issue. Let's talk about the campaign, shall we? Are you going to win the election?
I think the Prime Minister and all his ministerial team and candidates up and down the country are working their socks off to win their seats and hopefully for the Conservatives to secure a good result in this election.
It's not quite a direct answer to the question, is it?
Well, nobody knows, do we, Sophie? Until the poll closes and we start to get actual results, all we've got to go on are media reports from polls and polling organisations. But I've been knocking on doors in my former constituency and other constituencies, and I've found where I've been that the Conservative core vote is holding up. So I have more reason to be optimistic from the narrow and very anecdotal polling that I've been doing by knocking on doors, that the Conservative vote is not evaporating in the way that it would be suggested by if you'd only read media reports and opinion polls.
Because I've been looking at the polls, as you'd expect, throughout the campaign very closely. I've also been watching the Conservatives, and I have to say, a lot of your colleagues, look at what the line now seems to be, stop Labour getting a super majority, don't let Keir Starmer have a decade in power. The Prime Minister's in North Devon today. That's a seat with a 25,000 Conservative majority. I mean, it looks like you guys think it's all over.
No, the Prime Minister's been all over the place throughout this campaign. He's visiting Conservative-held seats and he's visiting other seats. So I don't think you can take a snapshot of a particular visit today as indicative that he's given up, because he hasn't given up. He's made it very clear. He's fighting every waking moment to try and retain both the Conservative government and Conservative candidates all over the country.
You're not standing at the election. You said it's because you turn 70 in the next Parliament, which is, fair enough. After 2 decades of serving your party, I'm interested to get a bit of perspective from you. Are you worried about the future of the Conservative Party? Because it does feel like, I guess, a public battle for the soul of the Conservative Party is taking place before our eyes. What would your advice be?
I think all political parties that are in office for a prolonged period, and remember, we've won 4 successive elections in a row. If we were to win this election, that in itself would be a record. All parties go through sort of waves of enthusiasm and support and waning of support. So it's no huge surprise that the opinion polls are suggesting that our support is declining somewhat at the moment. I think that my real concern about what's happening in this election is the sort of fragmentation of trust in politics across all parties. We have, polemicists standing up and saying all politicians are liars. We have leading front bench spokesmen on, I'm thinking particularly of many of the Labour Party members who can only seem to use the words chaos and liars now to describe their political opponents. This is very damaging for the body politic and respect in our political life from members of the public. If politicians themselves are calling each other by these very, derogatory terms. I've heard some of the Labour frontbenchers talking about the Conservatives setting fire, being the arsonists of this government. It's completely outrageous, this kind of language. And what it will lead to is, people not being interested in going into politics to be participating in that kind of contest. And we will therefore get lesser quality individuals standing for office. We'll get the public disenchanted and less likely to vote for those individuals. And that way, I think we head into a really uncertain future without confidence that we live in a good political system. That way, ultimately, authoritarianism lies, and that would be devastating for this country.
Interesting, really interesting to get your perspective. Thank you very much for talking so frankly to us on the programme today, Mr. Dunne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub. Would bringing back Boris make the difference to a Conservative election campaign? We will debate that. Another mega poll predicting a Conservative wipeout. The Prime Minister looking a bit sheepish. See what we did there? Is it too late to turn things around? We'll discuss. Hello, welcome back. Well, let's bring you up to date now, shall we, with the election in Scotland. And the Scottish Labour leader says a Labour government in Westminster would deliver pay rises for 200,000 people in Scotland with its policies on wages. And Sawa has been outlining Scottish Labour's election manifesto, which largely reflects that, published by Labour last week, as you'd expect. He said it would deliver change for the next generation, giving them back hope and opportunity.
A Labour government will have Scotland right at its heart, because people across Scotland are crying out for change, and they deserve governments that are focused on delivering for them. So with Labour, the Scotland office will be Scotland's voice at the heart of the next UK Labour government.
Anna Sawa there, speaking from Scotland. Let's get an update, shall we, on everything else that's been going on around the country on the campaign trail. Here's our political correspondent, Darren McCaffrey.
Come on. For 4 weeks, the Prime Minister's been desperately trying to coax back Conservative voters, but so far they're just not having any of it. Today, though, he was joined for the first time by a predecessor.
I'm here fighting for every vote for every seat.
With Lord Cameron mucking in, even with the most traditional of Conservative voters. One former Prime Minister, though, who's been almost entirely absent, is Boris Johnson, spending more time on holiday in the past month than he has campaigning. But it's something Rishi Sunak says he doesn't recognise.
Well, it's great that Boris is supporting the Conservative Party. I very much welcome that. He's endorsing many candidates in videos and letters which have been coordinated by the campaign. I know that will make a difference. And of course, every week he's making the case in his column.
Hello. Hi. And from one pub in southern England to another, increasingly confident Labour are now focusing on a wider range of Tory seats, today offering a retail commitment.
I'm really pleased today to be unveiling our plan for supporting small businesses, for supporting high streets, to make sure that more people are out using those small businesses on their high street. It's all part of our manifesto, which is a manifesto for wealth creation.
There's one down to us.
And for the Lib Dem leader, also in a marginal, he's sticking to a simple strategy of carefully targeting primarily Conservative seats in what was once the blue wall.
The Conservatives have failed our country, that's really clear, and perhaps they're beginning to realise what a bad job they've done on the economy, on the health service, on our environment. They are out of ideas, they are out of excuses, and they need to be out of office.
This election has set a different course from 2019. With a rocky campaign and a Conservative Party far behind in the polls, there are fewer battleground visits. Rather, Rishi Sunak has been heading deeper and deeper into safe, true blue Conservative constituencies, trying to catch the few remaining undecided voters. Darren McCaffrey, Sky News, North Devon.
That story is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Well, it's another day and another poll that spells bad news for the Conservatives. The latest survey, published by Ipsos, has shown that Labour are on course to win 43% of the vote and secure 453 seats, leaving the Conservatives with just 115 seats. Let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig. Get my words out. It's been a long day, John. Look, these polls, they really do seem like they're spelling bad news to the Conservative Party, don't they? We just heard Philip Dunne there bravely saying that we shouldn't take any notice of them, but I guess the kind of drumbeat is getting louder.
Well, polls are a snapshot, but when you've got a trend like we've got now, where they're all fairly similar, then this is terrible news for the Tories. Double trouble tonight. A terrible poll and a Tory defector, which I'll tell you about in a second, to Labour, that is. This mega poll, as I like to call them, it's MRP, and I'm not going to bore you with what that stands for, but it's a poll of 20,000 people. This one is by Ipsos, and there are the numbers. That's seats projected. Conservatives 115, Labour 453, Lib Dems 38, Reform 3. It also suggests SNP 15, Plaid Cymru 4, Greens 3. Now, they are naming top Tories they think will go, be casualties. Grant Shapps, Penny Mordaunt, Gillian Keegan, Johnny Mercer and Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's the Tories' worst ever result, they claim, since 1906, when they had 156. Much worse than 1997. Jeremy Hunt, close battle. They're not writing him off yet. Good. The less bad news for the Tories is that they say that 117 seats are still too close to call. With small changes could change the result. I should just mention there's another poll tonight, Savanta. That's got Labour 40%, Labour 40, Tories 21. Labour actually down 6, Reform UK at 14%.
I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And look, as you say, it's just a snapshot. There's still weeks to go in the campaign. But my goodness, how quickly politics could change, you know, compared to what happened at the last election in 2019. You got a defection for us. You promised us it, didn't you, John? What's going on?
Breaking news. This has just been announced by the Labour Party. John Cordwell. Now, he is the founder of Phones for You. Big Tory donor. He gave $500,000 to Boris Johnson's campaign just before the 2019 election. And he's now saying he's going to endorse and vote for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And he says, for many years, I've been despairing about the performance of the Tories. He says he donated $500,000. That was to keep to stop the disaster of Jeremy Corbyn becoming PM. And his reasons are, 1, Rishi's mismanagement of the economy during COVID. 2, Boris's lowering of ethical standards. And Tory cronies benefiting from PPE contracts. And then the Liz Truss debacle. So we keep hearing talk about how the Tories are struggling to raise money this time. They've got their big bash. We used to call it the black and white ball. It's at the posh Hurlingham Club on Thursday night, which, of course, is the night that Rishi Sunak, he won't be there because he's taking part in a debate. So the money is, well, we don't know if Mr Caldwell's actually going to give some money to the Labour Party, but he's not donating to the Tories and he's switched his allegiance.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there, our chief political correspondent. Right, let's chat to Nimco and Jim, shall we? Nimco, what do you make of these polls? Because it does look like there is overwhelming evidence now that Labour is going to win a majority, even if it's not quite at the highest end of projections. It's looking very hard to see how the Conservatives can get anything from this.
Yeah, it is looking hard for the Conservatives to return as government, but I think what I'm really concerned about is the idea of, like, 3 Reform MPs. I think we're really kind of sleepwalking into these exceptions of, like, right-wing kind of positions that Reform are having, and I think to have any elected representatives from Reform would be a problem.
Are you worried, just on that, are you worried about the impact that could have on the Conservative Party as well? I guess moving further to the right, becoming, I guess, unlike the same Conservative Party that you used to work with?
Yeah, 100%. I think the whole point is that you win from the centre. So when the Labour Party went to the left, that was an extreme problem, and the Conservative Party going to the right is actually a massive problem as well. So I think the Conservative Party should actually stand for its true values of compassion and all the things that we've seen, rather than actually trying to appease and get Reform voters back. I think they should really reject them and say this is not what we're about. And I think if they do lose, I think that's hopefully an opportunity for them to be able to kind of come back into the middle, as opposed to this kind of like Brexit mad party that they have been for the last 4 or 5 years.
We've become used to, haven't we, polls projecting Labour wins, Labour majorities. One thing I was quite keen to pick up with you is what's happening in Scotland, because you've obviously got your stripes from, campaigning up there. You know the area, the region very well, the country very well. How bad are things looking for the SNP?
It's really tough for the SNP, in a similar way that it's difficult for the Conservatives. Both governments have been in power for so long, and there's just a sense, both north and south of the border, that we should try something different. So while the conversation is significantly different in tone and content, the general theme and mood is very similar. You've had your chance. In the Conservatives' case, 14 years? The SNP's case, 15 years or more. It's time to try something different. Let's vote for change. And I think the Conservatives at a UK level are running the worst possible election I can ever remember. I mean, I saw there was the Conservative politician earlier this week on the news on a rival channel. Admittedly, you wouldn't ever let this happen on Sky.
Obviously, never.
He was
no mistakes made on Sky.
He was being interviewed actually in a graveyard in front of the tombstones. Now, there may have been reasons why he was in the graveyard, but he shouldn't have taken a camera crew with him and done an interview about possibly a fatally wounded election campaign.
Yeah, the headlines just write themselves, don't they?
Do.
Do you agree with what Jim was saying there? He thinks it's the worst ever election campaign he can remember.
Well, I think the John Major election was also quite bad as well, which is the one that ushered in New Labour. But I do think, ironically, just picking up on the change campaign, I think change is necessary. And one of the things that we were talking about is people are not voting for the Labour Party, which is problematic because they want the Labour Party. They're voting for the Labour Party because they're not the Conservatives. So I think that's when, if the Labour Party get into power, that they have to really show that they are different to the Conservatives, because I think voting for a Conservative-like conversation is really problematic, and the Labour Party still has the trade unions and still has a massive component which is for the left. So I think that's a conversation that Keir Starmer is going to have if he gets into number 10.
Interesting stuff. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Rishi Sunak says he's happy that Boris is backing the Conservatives. We'll see what he's been up to so far and chat that next.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, inside the migration crisis. Sky News witnesses dozens of migrants boarding small boats in northern France, with police seemingly powerless to stop them. Also tonight, more on the major polls suggesting the Conservatives are set for their worst ever general election results. And we'll be talking about the simple blood test which could detect Parkinson's 7 years before symptoms appear. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Beavers make very, very complicated habitats for water voles. So we've lost most of our wetlands in the UK over the last 150 years or so. So beavers burrowing, beavers dam making, beavers building, directing streams, making more braided water outlets, make these very, very messy, complicated wetlands. And they create lots of edges in those wetlands, which are perfect for water voles. Water voles are burrowing animals. They live next to watercourses. The problem we've had in the UK is that we've tend to have straightened our rivers, we've canalised them. For water voles predators, in particular the North American mink, that makes it very, very easy to basically just rattle through a watercourse and take out the water voles. I think in the 1960s we had about 8 million water voles. We're now down into the 100,000s. They're our most threatened mammal. Their numbers are dropping more than any other. So it doesn't matter whether that's England or Scotland, water voles are in trouble. Of all the species that we've reinforced or reintroduced, maybe water voles are the easiest. They used to be common throughout the UK, from lowlands right up into the higher mountain areas, which this is one of their strongholds now. So they're mini gardeners, if you like. So beavers will produce the habitat for them to live in. Water voles will then enhance that habitat. So they're chopping away at things like sedges and grasses on bank sides. That will clear small areas. That will encourage more wildflowers. Their burrows become homes for other small creatures. And that burrowing as well helps to stir up the soil, brings nutrients to the surface. That encourages more plant and more diverse plant life. I think beavers are fundamental to sort of, if you like, soft flood management. And the schemes that are operating now all over the country are looking at both their ability to prevent flooding by holding up water, and more recently, especially for you down there in the southeast, in holding up water to prevent drought. So beavers create habitat in the high headwaters of the stream, and you end up with a sump. It's a reservoir. They're replenishing groundwater supplies. So in a long dry period, that acts as a slow release. So that's another huge advantage of having beavers there.
Hello, welcome back. Now, after winning that 80-seat majority in 2019, doesn't that feel like a long time ago? Boris Johnson said the Red Wall had lent the Conservatives their vote. Well, that result helped cement his reputation to summon his party as one of their greatest campaign assets. But I think it's fair to say he's not really put his shoulder to the wheel of this Conservative election campaign, at least so far. He has backed certain specific candidates in specific parts of the country. Videos posted on social media show Boris Johnson throwing his weight behind a select few Conservative candidates. And he's also still busily scribbling his newspaper column. Here he is in one of his latest articles, warning, perhaps unsurprisingly, to vote Conservative, otherwise the country will face what he says would be Starmageddon. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn, that link he's trying to make as well. But it's not all work for Boris Johnson, because he has found time to head to the beach. Now, his wife, Carrie, posted this picture of their Sardinia holiday on her publicly viewable Instagram feed. For anyone who might doubt the former Prime Minister's commitment to the cause, Rishi Sunak himself was keen to emphasise that actually Boris Johnson has made a mark on the Conservative campaign.
Well, it's great that Boris is supporting the Conservative Party. I very much welcome that. He's endorsing many candidates in videos and letters which have been coordinated by the campaign. I know that will make a difference. And of course, every week he's making the case in his column and making sure that everyone understands that what a Labour government would do to this country and why it's important that everyone votes Conservative. And I'm glad he's doing that.
Right, let's bring in Nimco and Jim, shall we? Jim, do you think Boris Johnson is an asset to the Conservative campaign, firstly?
I think he was in 2019, but the public probably seen through Boris Johnson, and I think surely more importantly, Conservative MPs have seen through him. Let's remember, when he was Prime Minister, he was removed from office because 62 of his own ministers that he had appointed thought he lacked all sense of integrity and there needed to be a change. So I think the Conservatives are making a mistake that if they play the tune of 2019, it'll work for them in the same way. I suspect really what they're doing with this is we're in trouble on our right from one populist. Let's douse that flame with a different populist. And to me, involving Johnson at this stage suggests to me a campaign that's lost its sense of direction because they're still trying to beat the Reform Party rather than try and overcome Labour.
Nimco, do you think this accusation is fair that Boris Johnson hasn't been, I guess, heavily involved in the Conservative campaign so far?
I think he hasn't been heavily involved. I think that's a level of respect for the Prime Minister. I think they have completely different political kind of ideologies, and obviously he was somebody that replaced him, so I can completely understand that. But ultimately, he is popular in certain sectors of the country, and I think certain MPs are leaning towards that. And the fact that he's doing it, I think it's a kind gesture to those MPs that have probably reached out and asked. I would actually not think it's a Conservative kind of plan to have him involved. I think it's been individual MPs who like him and he's kindly sent them those videos. That's what I would think.
I mean, the relationship between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson hasn't been all plain sailing, I think it's fair to say, in recent years as well. I guess I do sometimes wonder if, that is, partly on Boris Johnson's mind. We're speculating, of course.
Of course. None of us can read which version of Boris's mind is at play this evening. He hasn't ruled out a possible return to frontline politics. When he resigned, he said he's leaving Parliament for now. So Nimco knows Boris Johnson better than I do, but he still harbours a sort of Churchillian ambition to return to the front line and hasn't given up all chance of being Prime Minister. I suspect he probably wouldn't want to be Conservative leader at the start of the next Parliament. There's too much money to be made outside of politics, and he would want to sort of seize the crown just before the election in 2029. But I'm guessing that's what's on his mind. But the thing honestly, if Boris Johnson's the answer, my sense is you're asking the wrong question.
It's fair to say that you do know Boris Johnson, Nimco. Do you think that's fair, what Jim said? Do you think he is still, I guess, leaving the door that little bit ajar to a return?
I guess all politicians do that, but I think UK politics has been very much brutal to him. I would have always liked him to go into the international stage and actually forget about the UK politics, because the stuff that he did on girls' education and things that he's able to use that platform in order to be able to advocate on things that he cares about would have been a lot better. So I think he should consider the international stage as opposed to the UK kind of politics.
But you might be a little bit tempted.
I think they all are. I think all politicians have an ego in order to come back. And I think one of the kind of issues that I had when, within this government and the last government is I was consistently lobbying certain MPs in order to do something, but they were always thinking about the next job rather than doing the job that they do now. So there's one thing that I've learned. I think everybody thinks that they want to be Prime Minister, but if you've had it once, I think it's something that you should kind of treasure and move on from.
There you go. Thank you both very much indeed. Lovely chats, really interesting discussion from both of you, so appreciate having you on the Politics Hub. Well, that is it for us tonight. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. And of course, at 9 p.m, I should say, we have got our migration special with Yalda Hakim. The poll's opening in 15 days, 11 hours, and just 3 minutes from now. I'll see you tomorrow night for more campaigning.